The sacred wolf had not eaten in 11 days. I stood at the edge of the great hall and watched it breathe, slow, labored, the silver flanks barely moving, and I felt the familiar weight settle in my chest that had lived there for 3 years now. The bond seal of Caldenmore, the living heart of everything my bloodline had built and held and bled for across 8 generations, was dying, and there was nothing my healers, my counselors, my ranking wolves, or my own 2 hands could do about it. My head of council, a man named Verath, had delivered the report that morning with the practiced flatness of someone who had stopped expecting good news. The wolf had refused the latest healer. It had refused the healer before that. In 400 years of guiding the fortunes of Caldenmore, the sacred wolf had chosen no one, no Luna, no bonded mate, no keeper, and my predecessors' predecessors had written it off as temperament. Sacred creatures were allowed to be difficult. Sacred creatures were allowed to refuse. What no one had written into the histories was what it meant when a creature like that began to die. I left Verath mid-sentence and went to the hall alone. The hall was older than the hold itself, carved from the mountain's own stone before the hold was built around it, so that the walls seemed to grow from the earth rather than sit upon it. Iron lanterns hung low on chains, and the light they cast was amber and steady, and it smelled of old pine and the cold that lived permanently in the stone no matter what season turned outside. In the center, on a raised bed of ash wood that had been replaced every 50 years for as long as records existed, the sacred wolf lay curled on its side. And beside it, sitting cross-legged on the stone floor with her knees folded under her and her palms resting loose on the ashwood edge, was a woman I had never seen before. She was not doing anything dramatic. She was not performing a ritual, not burning herbs, not chanting in the old tongue. She was simply present. Her hands were still, one resting near the wolf's shoulder without touching it, and she was speaking, very low, in a voice I could not make out from where I stood. The wolf's breathing did not change, but its ears, which had been flattened for 3 days, according to the last hall-keeper's report, were turned slightly in her direction. I stood in the doorway for a long time before she heard me. When she finally turned, there was no alarm in her face. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has come in late to a room where something careful is happening, a brief, assessing glance, and then a return to what mattered. "You'll want to come in quietly," she said, "or not at all. He's having a better hour than he's had this week." I was the Alpha King of Caldenmore. I had not been given instructions since I was 12 years old. I came in quietly. Her name was Lena, and she was from Ashwood, which was a cluster of border villages 3 days' ride from the hold that I had visited exactly once in my life, and remembered chiefly as being very cold and very far from anywhere useful. She had no pack rank. Ashwood's wolves were solitary farmers for the most part, logging wolves, wolves who measured the world in what could be grown or built, and she had no bloodline distinction that any record in Caldenmore's archive could find. She had simply arrived 6 months ago, walked into the hold, walked past 3 different sets of sentries by the simple method of never looking like she was asking permission, and sat down beside the sacred wolf. My head of hall, a woman named Prail who had served 3 kings before me and who had opinions about everything, had not removed her. I asked Prail about this later. "I tried," Prail said. She looked at me and said the wolf was running a fever in the 3rd joint of his left foreleg, and asked me to bring clean water and a particular bark from the stores, because she could see I knew where the stores were and she did not. "And you brought it." She was right about the fever, Prail said, which was not exactly an answer but was, I understood, the whole answer. For 6 months, Lena had been there. She had not asked for accommodation. She slept in the anteroom off the hall on a cot that Prail had eventually placed there without being asked, because the alternative was a village woman sleeping on stone. She ate with the hall staff. She accepted whatever the kitchen sent. She had asked once for a particular kit of tools, small bone needles, a pressing board, a set of wrapped compress cloths, and had not asked for anything else. The wolf had not recovered, but it had, in the months since she arrived, stopped declining. My counsel's position was clear. She had no rank, no right to be in that hall, and no demonstrable results. They wanted her removed. I had, over 3 separate council sessions, simply not agreed to it. I had not given them a reason. I was not, in those weeks, entirely certain I had won. But I kept going back to the hall. The thing about Lena, the thing I noticed first, before anything else, was that she was not interested in me. Not in the way of performance, not in the careful, studied disinterest of court women who were very interested and wished to appear otherwise. She simply had a primary concern, and it was the wolf, and I was not it. When I came to the hall, she would tell me what she had observed since I was last there. The wolf's temperature, which she measured by a method involving the pressure and warmth of her palm placed flat along his spine, the quality of his breathing, whether he had accepted water. She told me these things directly, with no cushioning and no ceremony, and she did not add a title to any of it. "He accepted water twice this morning," she told me one afternoon, 2 weeks after I first found her there. "That's better than yesterday. I don't want you to read too much into it. He's not better, he's just not worse right now, but it matters." "Why does it matter," I said, "if he's not better?" She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked why breathing matters. "Because not worse is how things get better," she said. "You hold the line, then you hold it again. Then one day the line is a little further forward than it was." I thought about that for longer than was probably reasonable for a conversation about a wolf's water intake. She had a way of being very still that I did not encounter often in people. The court had its own kind of stillness, the performed composure of individuals who had learned to keep their faces smooth, but Lena's stillness was different. It was the stillness of someone who was simply not afraid of silence. She could sit beside the wolf for an hour without speaking or moving, not because she was waiting or thinking about something else, but because she was attending. She was there. The whole of her was in the room, in the hour, in the slow silver breathing of the wolf beside her. I had been attending to Caldenmore for 11 years. I had not been in a room the way she was in a room for a long time. My wolf, not the sacred wolf, but the inner wolf, the bond self that every alpha carries like a second heartbeat, went very quiet when I was near her. Not wary, not alert, quiet in the way of deep water, quiet in the way of a room after a long noise stops. I noticed this. I did not know what to do with it, so I said nothing. My counsel brought the matter to session formally in the 5th week. Verath laid it out with the precision of a man who had prepared his argument carefully. She was not ranked. She was not credentialed by any wolf healer guild in Caldenmore or its territories. She had no documented results, and her continued presence in the sacred hall set a precedent that any wolf with a bag of bark and a theory could walk into the kingdom's most sacred space without authorization. The other counselors agreed in the particular way of people who have already agreed before the meeting began. I let them finish. "The wolf's fever in the 3rd left joint is down," I said. "Prail's records show his water intake has increased by half over 6 weeks. He has not declined in 2 months. These are not large things, but they are the first documented improvements in 3 years. With respect," Verath said, "correlation is not. She told me yesterday that she thinks he won't make the winter if we don't address the way he's lying. The ashwood bed slopes slightly at the right side and he's compensating, which is tiring the shoulder muscles and affecting his breathing." I paused. "I've had the bed leveled. She was right about the slope." Silence. "She stays," I said. The thing I did not say to my counsel, could not have said without them thinking their king had lost his mind, was that I had started going to the hall not only to check on the wolf. I told myself in those weeks that it was about the kingdom, that the sacred wolf was the bond seal of Caldenmore, the living record of our bloodline's covenant with the wolves of the old mountain lines, and I was responsible for that covenant, and therefore I was responsible for everything happening in that hall, and therefore I went there every day because that was my duty. I believed about half of this. The other half I kept in a separate room of myself and did not examine. What I knew without examining it was that when I walked into the hall and found her there, always there, never not there, her hands quiet and her voice low, something in me eased. 11 years of being Alpha King of Caldenmore. 11 years of holding the border agreements and the mining councils and the pact disputes and the slow decline of the bond seal. And the weight of it was a thing I had long since stopped noticing, because you stop noticing the things you carry when you carry them long enough. And then I would walk into that hall, and in the amber lamplight with the sound of the wolf's breathing and Lena's low voice telling a wolf, about the frost she'd seen on the north window that morning, whether or not wolves found frost interesting, which she seemed to think they might, and the weight would, for a little while, be something I could feel the edges of rather than something I simply was. It alarmed me. I found it easier not to think about why. She noticed everything, which was part of what made it difficult to not think about why. "You're tired today," she said one evening, not looking up from the compress she was rewrapping around the wolf's left foreleg. It was not a question. "I'm always tired," I said. "You're more tired today. The Border Council ran long." "How did you know the Border Council was today?" She did look up then, briefly. "Prail. She tells me things. I think she likes having someone to tell things to who isn't in the council. Prail has opinions about everyone in the council." "She does," Lena said, returning to the compress. "They're mostly accurate." I sat down on the stone bench along the wall, something I had not done before, because the stone bench was for hall staff and I was the king, but something about the way she said it made formality seem like a great deal of effort, and I watched her work. Her hands were deft, which I had noticed before, but what I found myself watching was the quality of her attention. The compress had to be rewrapped at a particular tension, enough to support, not enough to restrict, and she did not look away from it while she spoke, and she did not let speaking make her hands less careful. She could hold two things at once without sacrificing either. I had known people my whole life who could not do this. Advisors who dropped one thread the moment they picked up another. Warriors who thought well or acted quickly, but never both. "You do that well," I said, because I was apparently going to say things now. She tied off the compress. "Rapping, anyone can learn it." "Not everyone learns it that well." She looked at me again, and this time she seemed to actually be looking, not assessing, not calculating, just seeing. The way she looked at the wolf, the way she looked at everything she was actually paying attention to. "You could learn it," she said, "if you wanted. A king wrapping compressed bandages. A king who wants his sacred wolf to live," she said, and it was not a challenge or a correction, just a plain thing, stated plainly. "It helps him, I think, when more than one pair of hands tends him. He's been alone a long time." I looked at the wolf. He was watching us both, not the guarded, strained alertness of a sick animal, but something slower, patient. "Show me," I said. She taught me to wrap the compress on 3 separate evenings. I was not good at it the first time. I was acceptable at it the second time. By the third, I could do it well enough that she said good in the tone of someone who does not hand out good carelessly, and I felt, absurdly, like I had passed a test that mattered more than any my counsel had ever set me. The wolf tolerated my hands, more than tolerated. On the third evening, when I had finished and Lena was checking my work with the light press of 2 fingers to test the tension, the wolf turned his great head and rested his chin on my knee, and the weight of it was enormous and gentle, and I did not move for a long time. "He doesn't do that," I said. "He does now," Lena said. She was not watching the wolf. She was watching me. And the thing I had been keeping in the separate room of myself without examining it pressed against the door, and I let it press, and did not open the door and said nothing. But that evening, walking back through the hold corridors, my bond self did a thing I did not have a name for. It was not the surging, urgent pull I had always heard described. The lore said the mate bond announced itself like a tide, sudden and unmistakable. But this was quieter than that. It was more like recognizing something you had always known but not had words for. Like turning a corner you have walked past every day and finally seeing what is in the courtyard behind it. I went to bed and did not sleep well. The crisis came on a night in late autumn. I woke to Prail at my door, her voice even and her face not, and I was dressed and moving before she finished her sentence. The wolf had declined suddenly. In the space of 2 hours, temperature dropping, breathing shallowing, the amber light in his eyes dimming in the way that hall keepers described in the oldest records as the last sign before the end. The hold was awake by the time I reached the hall. Torches lit, the corridor full of my council and their attendants and the ranking wolves of the hold's first families, all gathered in that particular human cluster of people who want to witness an important ending and do not know what else to do. Verath was there. 3 healers were there, standing outside the hall's doorway with their equipment unused, which told me what they expected. I went through them without stopping. Inside it was amber and quiet. Lena was on the floor beside the wolf. Not sitting cross-legged as she usually was, she was kneeling, both knees on the cold stone, her body bent forward, her forehead nearly touching his. She was speaking to him in a voice so low I could only hear its rhythm, not its words. Her right hand was flat on his chest, between his front legs. Her left hand was against his cheek. The wolf's breathing was very shallow. I crouched beside her. Not behind her, not at a watching distance beside her, close enough that my shoulder was near hers, and I did not think about whether this was appropriate for an alpha king, or what the corridor full of my counselors could see through the open doorway. I put my hand on the ashwood beside hers and I stayed. "He's cold," she said, not stopping the rhythm of her voice, just folding the words into it. "I know. I've been talking to him all night." A pause. "I'm not ready to stop." "Then don't," I said. Time passed in the particular way it does in rooms where something important is happening, not slow and not fast but dense. Every minute waited. The corridor outside was silent. Someone had thought to half-close the doors. The amber light held steady. I watched her face, not the wolf, her. The line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she was giving everything she had to the animal under her hands without performing it, without making it a gesture or a display. Just giving it, holding the line, then holding it again. She had said, "That is how things get better. You hold the line, then you hold it again." And then something happened. I do not know how to describe it in terms that my counsel would find satisfactory, because it had no political logic and no strategic relevance, and was not the kind of thing that belongs in the official record of Caldenmore's Bond Seal history, though I suspect it will be there anyway. What I can say is this. Lena pressed her left hand, a little more firmly, against the wolf's cheek. And the wolf moved. Not convulsively, not the alarming lurch of a dying animal, a small, deliberate movement, the kind a healthy wolf makes when it turns to press into a hand it trusts. His great head shifted, slow and certain, into her palm. And then, in the dimness of the amber hall, on the ashwood bed that had held the sacred wolf through 8 generations of Caldenmore kings, in front of no one but the low fire and the iron lamps, and the king crouching beside a healer on cold stone. The bond seal lit. It came from her hands first. Not a flash, not a violence of light, a warmth, a slow illumination, the kind of light that comes up the way dawn comes up, noticed gradually and then all at once. Her palms, both of them, the left against his cheek, the right on his chest. The same light that I had seen as a child in the history's illustration, the same gold-amber glow that the record said had not been seen in 400 years. It was in her hands. The wolf's breathing deepened. I did not move. I do not think I breathed. The glow spread from her hands to his fur, along his spine, down his legs to the tips of his ears, and as it went the great animal, the sacred wolf, the bond seal of Caldenmore, 4 centuries old and dying, lifted his head. He did not just lift it, he lifted it, turned it, and looked at her. And then he looked at me. I felt the bond seal enter me the way I imagine a key enters a lock, not violently, not dramatically, but with an inevitability that made you understand the door had been waiting. Something in the center of my chest, behind the breastbone where my bond self lived, opened. Not broke open. Opened, the way a door opens when it is unlocked and someone finally turns the handle. On my left wrist, the mate mark burned to life. It was warm. Not painful warm, the way a hearth fire is warm when you come in from the cold, the warmth of something that knows you and has been waiting for you to arrive. I looked down at my wrist and saw it there, silver gold, settled and clear, and then I looked at Lena's left wrist and saw its mirror there, against her skin. She was looking at it too. We were both very still for a long moment. The wolf made a sound, not a whimper, not a growl, but the low resonant note that the histories described as the bond seal's acknowledgement, the sound it had made 400 years ago when the last bonded pair had been recognized. I had read about that sound. I had not expected to hear it. Lena turned and looked at me. Her eyes were steady. Not alarmed, not overwhelmed, steady. The way she was always steady, though I thought I could see at the edges something that might become overwhelmed later when there was time for it. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. The wolf laid his head back down on the ashwood, not with the terrible heaviness of before, but with the settled ease of something at rest, and closed his eyes. I should tell you what happened next, because the histories will record it in formal language, and the formal language will lose the part that mattered. What happened next was, I stood and I offered her my hand. Not a proclamation, not a ceremony. Just my hand, held out to her, because she had been on her knees on cold stone for however many hours, and the doors behind us were about to open, and I did not want the first thing she experienced when they did to be standing up alone. She looked at my hand for a moment. "I should tell you," she said, still on the floor, "that I didn't come here for this. I know. I came for the wolf. I know. I didn't plan anything. I'm from Ashwood. I wrap compressed bandages and I know which bark brings fevers down, and I've never been in a place like this in my life, and I don't know what any of." "Lena," I said. She stopped. "I know," I said. "I know you didn't come for this. I know you didn't arrange it. I know you are from Ashwood, and that this hall is not a place you expected to be, and that you have spent 6 months sleeping on a cot in the anteroom because a wolf needed tending, and you were the one who would tend it." I kept my hand where it was. "I'm asking you to take my hand because the doors are going to open, and my counsel is going to come through them, and you should not have to face that on your knees on a cold floor." She was quiet for a moment. "Your counsel doesn't like me," she said. "My counsel is going to have to renegotiate several of their positions," I said. She looked at my hand again, then she took it. I helped her up, and when she was standing I did not let go, not in a grip, just not letting go. She seemed to find this acceptable. The doors opened. Verath, I will say this for him, he was not stupid. He looked at the hall, the warm amber light, the wolf with his head raised and his breathing even, the glow on Lena's hands already fading to a warmth that was simply a warmth, and at the mate marks on our wrists, and at the way I was standing, and he arrived at the correct conclusion quickly. The ranking wolves of the first families arrived at it slightly more slowly, and arrived at it in the particular way of people who have a great many thoughts about what this means for them, and are attempting to process them while also being required to immediately bow. They bowed, all of them. Even Verath, who was not given to unnecessary physical gestures, bent his head. Lena watched this without moving. When Verath straightened, he looked at her with the expression of someone revising a document in real time. "Healer," he said, which was not, technically, the correct address for the woman who bore the Alpha King's mate mark and whose hands had just woken the bond seal of Caldenmore for the first time in 400 years. But it was what he had, and I could see him trying to locate something more appropriate. "That's fine," Lena said. "I am a healer." "The wolf," he stopped, looking at the sacred wolf, who was now watching everyone in the hall with an expression that I can only describe as quietly satisfied. He's stable," she said. "He needs to eat tomorrow. Nothing heavy. I'll tell Prael what to send. And the left foreleg compress needs changing in the morning, but I'll do that." She said it the way she said everything. Plain, direct, as if it were simply the next thing that needed to be done. The ranked wolves of Caldenmore's first families, standing in their best cloaks in the amber light of the Bondseal Hall, looked at each other. Then they looked at me. "The sacred wolf has chosen," I said. It was the formal phrase, the ancient formula. Prael, standing near the door, closed her eyes briefly in the way of someone who has been hoping to hear those words for 3 years. "The bond seal of Caldenmore is lit. By Caldenmore's oldest law, the one the bond seal recognizes is acknowledged before all." Lena's hand was in mine. I could feel the warmth of the mate mark, settled and steady on my wrist. "This is real," I said quietly, only for her. "But nothing that happens from here happens without your choice. Mate mark or not, bond seal or not, that's how it works." She turned to look at me. Her face in the amber light was doing several things at once. I could see the steadiness she always had, and I could see what it was keeping contained, and I found that I wanted to know all of it eventually when she was ready. "I chose to come here," she said. "I chose to stay. I chose to tend him even when your council wanted me removed." She paused. "I'm not good at not choosing things." "No," I said, "you're not." Something in her face shifted. Not a smile, not yet, but the approach of one. The wolf, on his ashwood bed, let out a long breath that was entirely peaceful. She became Luna of Caldenmore in the early winter, in a ceremony that was, by all accounts, shorter and quieter than any such ceremony in Caldenmore's recorded history. She refused the ceremonial gown 3 times on the grounds that she could not tend the wolf in ceremonial sleeves, and the 3rd time she refused it, I told the head of ceremony that she would wear what she chose, and that was the end of the matter. What she chose was a deep blue that was almost black, with no embroidery she hadn't asked for and sleeves that ended at the elbow. Prael, who had strong feelings about occasion dressing, said nothing, which meant for Prael that she thought it was right. The bond seal glowed at the ceremony. Faintly, not the blaze of the recognition night, but a warm, steady light that the oldest members of the first families said they had read about but never expected to see. The wolf was in the hall, on his feet for the first time in months, and he watched the ceremony with the patient attention of someone who had been waiting for it for a very long time. Verath made a speech that was careful and formally gracious, which was the closest Verath came to warmth, and which I recognized as a significant concession from him. The first families bowed when Lena was presented. The border representatives, Ashwood among them, a cluster of logging wolves who had ridden 3 days to attend and who looked faintly stunned to be there, stood in the back and said nothing. But when Lena looked out at them, she smiled, and it was the first time I had seen her smile that completely. After the ceremony, she went immediately back to the hall to check on the wolf's left foreleg. I followed her. "You could have stayed for the rest," I said. "There's a feast." "There will be feasts," she said, not looking up from the compress she was already checking. "Is the left foreleg going to heal itself?" "Probably not." "Then someone should look at it." I sat down on the stone bench along the wall and watched her. The amber light was the same as it always was. The wolf's breathing was steady and even. Lena's hands moved with the same careful deftness they always had. I thought about a hall filling with witnesses while the bond seal dimmed, and the night she had kept her forehead nearly to his and spoken to him in a voice too low to carry. I thought about the compressed lessons and what she had taught me without ever presenting it as a lesson. I thought about her saying, "You hold the line, then you hold it again." Caldenmore had been holding the line for 3 years. She had held it with us, held it without us, really, since she had done it largely alone. And now the line was further forward than it had been in 4 centuries. "Lena," I said. "Oh, thank you." She looked up at that. Just for a moment, just a look, but it landed, as her looks always did, precisely where she aimed it. "Don't thank me," she said. "I came for the wolf." "I know you did. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know that too." She held my gaze for another moment. Then she returned to the compress, and I could see the edge of that not-quite smile again, the one I was learning to read. "You could help," she said, "if you're going to sit there." I got up off the bench. The wolf watched us both with those patient amber eyes as I crossed the hall to where she was kneeling, and the bond seal on the walls gave its quiet, steady light. And for the first time in 11 years, I was in a room with no weight at all. Only the warmth of the mate mark on my wrist, and the sound of her voice, and the work that needed doing. In Caldenmore, we say the bond seal recognizes what is true before the mind does. I believe it now. I believed it the moment that great silver head turned, slow and certain, into her hands, not because she had rank or title or bloodline or any of the things my counsel had spent 3 years insisting she must have to be permitted near the sacred hall, because she had stayed, because she had held the line and then held it again, and because the thing that recognizes truth in this kingdom does not care about credentials. She was my mate, and the kingdom's heart had known it long before I did. I finished wrapping the compress. She checked it with 2 fingers and said, "Good." That was enough.